the spreadsheet. Yep. Now let you in. Yep.
Right, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, that's fine.
So you want to share that?
Yeah, can we share that? I suppose, first of all, we should welcome you all. I can't actually see you at the moment. We don't have our camera up, but I should first of all welcome you all. It's lovely to see you. How many people have we got here, do we think? Because I know there's more than... We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's more than one person on each camera. Oh, there's a whole room full of people there. Yeah, great. So the aim of today is to really have a look at what you've done since we met you in Kalmar, and then to have a look at the first of the data collection techniques. So I've asked Kevin if you could just share the screen with you, because if you remember how we left things with you last time, was that you were going to refine the research questions that you first started thinking about when we had our meeting back in the beginning of October. And I sent a link for all of you to complete this spreadsheet. I was trying to find the easiest way really to refine your research questions. And the first column, the first 2 columns was really about who you are. And the third column, column D, is around what your first attempt at the research question is. Now I can see from looking at that spreadsheet that quite a lot of you have gone in, you've read the feedback that we've given you, and you have refined your research question into a second attempt. We have been back in and given you some more feedback, and from that, I think in column H, you should see that some people have now got a final research question. I think it's probably only 4 or 5 of you that have got a final research question. But I think the big thing from our point of view is that you really need to get this research question finalised in the next week or so, because unless that's finalised, you can't really move on to the data collection. And in order to help you with the data collection, which we're going to talk about in the second part of this Zoom meeting today, we've created for every one of you a portfolio. And the portfolio will be in the name of the people who are in column B and column C. So, for example, if we see number 1, we've got John and Anika. So I have made one portfolio for John and Anika. And Kevin, could you just get that other one up for me? You had it here a minute ago.
Yep. A second.
I'm just going to show you what that portfolio tool looks like. There we go. Okay, so we happen to have open the one for Ulrika at the moment. The page, the portfolio is made up of several boxes, and those boxes take you through all the various stages of the research process. So stage 1 is around identifying your pedagogical focus, and most of this has already now been done, and it's just a case of getting your research question finalised. And we'll be using these portfolios to give you one-to-one support. So from now on, we'll be moving away from the Google spreadsheet, and you'll be moving into your individual portfolios where we will work with you. We'll divide you up between Kevin and myself, and half of you will be with me, half will be with Kevin. And we'll help and leave comments and feedback using the comments field on the Word document, on the Google document, to give you the support that you need to actually carry this out. And I think it's probably worth you seeing this before we start talking about the data analysis, so you can see how we're going to go through it. So really for stage 1, you should be able to fill in pretty much all of these boxes now. Once you go past stage 1, if you just scroll down a bit for me, you'll see that underneath every stage, we've put a reflective activity. And we've done this to help you think about what you've learned from doing the process, because I hope that you'll be able to then go off and do this yourself again another time, maybe in another academic year. You might be able to support some of your colleagues who want to try this, who haven't been able to come to this training session. So the reflective activities are really very much about getting you to think about what you've learned and what you might change if you were going to do this another time. So after we've finished the 3 webinars, which are today, tomorrow and Wednesday, what we hope is that you'll be able to complete stage 1. And if we just scroll down a bit, please, Kevin. We'll then come on to stage 2. And by the end of this, we hope that you'll be able to start shaping what you're going to be doing in terms of collecting your data. And you'll see that in stage 2, there's the main box, which asks you a couple of questions about completing the data planning matrix. It asks you a little bit about ethics. And then underneath we have actually the data collection planning matrix. And we can talk a bit more about that as we go through the data analysis, the data collection webinars over the next 3 days. But really what we'd like you to do is to think about what your research questions are and what kind of tools you're going to use to collect data. And really the focus of the next 3 meetings is going to be about that, isn't it, Kevin? About the data collection. So this is where we're moving to. So I hope maybe we should just take, are there any questions about any of that before we go on to the first part of the data collection? Anybody like to ask anything? I suppose what I could add is in that spreadsheet, which Kevin now has open, he's just lost it, where is it? Thank you. If you go to column H, that says, please post in here your final attempt. As soon as I see your final attempt posted in that column, in column H, then I will give you a link to your portfolio so that you can start filling in your portfolio. Okay.
So there are a few still to be completed, aren't there?
There's quite a lot that still haven't got the final question in. Yeah.
So that's obviously a key activity to undertake before you start collecting data and to run past us so that we can give you any feedback. And as Sarah was saying, start filling in that portfolio, that record of what you're going to do and what you've already done.
So, are there any questions from anyone? Can you all hear us? Yes. All nodding their heads, okay. Okay, so I think we're ready to have a look at the data collection, and I'm just waiting. I think Kevin's going to get up.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing screen. Unfortunately, I'm not too au fait with this system yet. We're still playing with Zoom. So in a second, I'll stop sharing the screen because I'm imagining you're all still seeing my screen, are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can all see your screen. So
okay. Can
you just open Zoom? Back to meeting. Can you press that again?
Right, we'll be back in a second. Don't go away.
Well, can you share the screen in the Google Classroom with the notes that you put in there?
I'm just trying to get back to the screen because everybody's just seeing my screen, aren't you? And where's my screen gone?
Can you put Google Classroom up there? Because what you want to show them is the list of questions.
Yeah.
Is it?
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so.
So.
Put that screen up there so they can see that.
Yeah, that's the one I'm trying to get back to.
You scrolled up fully. Can you scroll to the top? Oh, you don't have a different view menu to me up there.
What it is down here, really, is I'm not seeing the bottom of the screen, which is... Sorry about this, folks. I'm back.
Maybe whilst we're just trying to find out how to turn this off, you might just have a quick look at that spreadsheet and have a look at the question that you've posed and see if you can obviously see something that you think is finished, and if it is, post it in column H, and then I can have a quick look at it later on this evening.
How to...
Can you not just put that up, or is that what you're trying to find?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find.
So can you not do a search for it in your Google folders? So just come back to here.
Yeah, but I'm not sharing this screen. That's the problem. I can get there.
Yeah, but then you can copy and paste the URL up here.
That's my other.
Yeah, just copy and just use one of these.
Jag tänkte så man kunde jobba på datorn, för det var ju det de sa att man skulle kunna göra.
No, you don't want to be that. You...
Ja, men det är därför jag skulle behöva komma ner så att vi ser.
Yeah. There we are.
Okay, that was a bit long-winded. Sorry about that. Okay, so hopefully you can all see the same screen. You could be logging into this yourselves as well, if you're struggling. So you can see that we've posted for this seminar and for the webinar on Tuesday and on Wednesday. We've posted some notes and some activities, giving you some background information about all three. So today we're going to look at interviews, and tomorrow we're going to look at surveys and questionnaires, and Wednesday at observation. And we've chosen these three data collection methods because they're the most popular. There are other ways to collect data, and you may decide you want to do that, but most classroom research falls into one of these three. So can we just quickly take a show of hands? Is there anybody who's using one of these? Anybody want to indicate that this is something they are planning to do, either interviews, surveys, or observations? If you just want to take the microphone and let us know what you're planning to do. If you've muted your microphone, just unmute the microphone.
So we would just like to know roughly how many people are thinking of doing interviews, for example. Are any of you here today interested in doing interviews?
Ja, det är de som sitter bredvid varandra som stör. Aha.
Nobody thinking about interviews, or is it just that you're not sure?
One
Okay,
person. Okay, we've got somebody who's brave enough to put. Two people have put their hands up. Excellent. Okay, you're in the right workshop then.
Okay, well, it may be even if you're not doing interviews, you want to think about why interviews are important, because it may be that you justify your method by saying, what I want to do, for example, is observation. And there's a good reason for that, because that's really one of the most important points about any data collection method, that you need to understand what the benefits are and some of the drawbacks. And sometimes the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. So it's obviously important to understand a range of methods in order to choose the one that's appropriate for your research question. And today we're going to look at interviews. So we've posted some material in this window, which I'm scrolling up. Hopefully you can all still see.
Kevin, I have a little question here. So we are secure about that. I can't see that this session is recorded. You have put on recording.
It is recorded, Jürgen. Yeah, the session's recorded. And after the session, we'll give you the link to that so that you can go back and watch it again.
Very good. I also want to make sure of that. Thank you.
Now, the session's automatically recorded. I perhaps should have actually said that to people, and just to make sure everybody's happy with that. But if you are wanting to go back to this, you can do so. You can see what's on the screen and listen to us as well. Okay? So we've got 4 questions here that we've posed as being important questions yet. Do you have a question?
I min trädgård borde nog inga björndjur i alla fall. Jag hittade ingenting.
Question there? Somebody wanting to ask a question?
Ja, jag tror det.
Ja, jag skrapar lite idag för att se. Nej. Vad gör vi om vi inte hittar? För att det är
No.
kul. Något ljud.
Okay, we'll carry on. If you want to ask a question, just stop us at any point. Just stop or use your microphone, turn your microphone on.
Ja, och jag menar, och det är kul om man inte så jäkla mycket.
Excuse me, can I say something?
Yes, yeah, certainly.
I would like to ask all participants to mute their phone, because if they're talking about other things than the seminar, it might be, it is recording. So for their own sake and for all participants, it's better. So Camilla,
Okay, so if you're
we've got someone here who hasn't muted their phone or their microphone.
we don't understand what you're speaking about, but if it's your shopping or whatever you're planning,
Yeah.
to mute the microphone. So there's a little button at the bottom.
I'm not sure that they can hear us.
I'm not sure who it is.
Jag satt igång en dator.
You can mute the microphone.
Yeah, but we don't know who this is.
No. According to this, everybody.
Hello.
Mute
Could
that
you-
one. I can mute that microphone. According to this, everybody else's microphone is muted. Is that better?
Yeah, we're not hearing.
Okay, we can't hear you now. Sorry.
But-
Don't forget now, to speak, you'll need to unmute your microphone. Okay, otherwise we won't be able to hear you. Right. Okay, let's go back then. So we've got 4 questions we'd like you to think about, and I'm going to give you just a few minutes to think about the first of these by yourself. Well, hopefully you're not by yourself, or you're with somebody else. I'm going to give you just 3 minutes in your group to consider the first question, which is, why use interviews? And the question is, how are they aligned with your research question? What do you think of the benefits and the drawbacks? Now, if you're planning to use interviews, before we talk very much about interviews, I just want you to think about why. Why are you planning to use an interview? Why do you think it's a good way of data collection, collecting data for your project? What do you see as the advantages? And possibly, do you see any drawbacks as well? So I'd like you to just give that a few minutes thought, and we have created a link. So you'll need to click on this link in the seminar, but you'll see I've created a link in what's called Today's Meet. I'll click on this and you should see it. Okay. And can you all see that? Today's Meet, it's a very straightforward chat board where you can just post questions. You shouldn't have to sign in. I think what you will have to do is put your name in, can be a nickname. And what I want you to do as a group is just to think about that question. Why would you use interviews, particularly if it's something you are going to do? What are the advantages? And just post your thoughts here in this box where I've actually got another question, which is, what is an interview? Okay, so it's very easy to use. Just put your name in. I'll show you how that's done. Kevin, join, and start here. And you'll see that posts straight into there. Okay, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes. If you're by yourself, talk to yourself. If you're with somebody else, just share this with your group, and we'll start the clock now. Off you go. Oh, it's there.
What's that?
Nu ska jag in här, tror jag.
Okay, how are we getting on? I can see one or two people are chatting. Because you're muted, we can't hear you. But that's fine. One or two posts coming in on the today's meet. What do you see as the benefits of interview? I've asked that question. Asking the students the same question before and after, using like exit tickets. Okay. Any other points to make before we go on? Okay, let's go back then to the questions and just think about for a moment what we see as the benefits. And I've put down here 4 questions I think that we need to think about when we're using interviews. And as you can see, if you've had a chance to read this, there are many different formats that interviews can undertake. I think the important thing to remember about an interview is that it's a form of conversation. It's a kind of conversation because you're trying to ask questions. And in many ways, that's true of many data collection methods that we use as researchers. We're assuming that by asking questions, we can get a deeper understanding about a particular problem or issue that's causing us some problems. So if I'm in a classroom context and I'm trying to understand the dynamics of the classroom, why students are acting or behaving as they are, one approach is to ask them questions. It's not the only approach, of course, but it's one way. And as I've written here, an interview is really a kind of semi-formal conversation, and it can take a number of different forms. So at one extreme, you can have a very formal conversation, and it's the kind of conversation where you're asking interview questions, which are very precise and are almost always the same. So a good example of that kind of interview would be something like a piece of market research that's been undertaken for, say, a product. You might be stopped outside a shop and a researcher asks you a series of questions about something that you're purchasing or likely to buy. And they would ask the same question to every person. And we'd call that a very structured interview. And you could use that as well if you decided it was appropriate. More commonly in educational interviews, we use what's called a semi-structured interview, where we start with a series of questions, but we're open to elaborating on the questions depending on the answers that participants give us. So sometimes participants will say one thing and we might want to find out more and we'll actually elaborate. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen because I'm thinking you might actually want to see us. So actually I am not sharing my screen, am I? You seeing me? Can I just check? Are you seeing us or sharing the screen?
You can see us.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, they can see us. So that's the camera there.
Oh, there we are. Sorry. There we are. I think you can see us now, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's better. So sometimes you've got what's called a semi-structured interview. And in a semi-structured interview, you'll start with a series of questions, but you'll be flexible and you'll ask questions dependent on the answer. So your questions will differ and they won't all be the same. At the other extreme, you've got what's called an open-ended interview. And an open-ended interview really is very much like a conversation with no structure. So you might ask somebody, for example, I'd like you to tell me about your experiences of maths teaching. And that would be it. That would start the conversation and you would respond according to what they say. So those are 3 typical interview structures. And what we've done is to produce some resources for you. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen again. If you have a look further down here, you should see that we've produced some resources for you to help you think about the different types of interviews you might undertake. And the one I think that would be most useful for you to undertake, we haven't got time to do it today, but we'll highlight what we think you should look at after the session. We've put one in here, which is called How to Do a Research Interview. Has anybody had a chance to look at this yet?
So it's the third one down towards the bottom.
It's this one, how to do. I'm going to play it in a second. I'll play a little part of this. You'll see that what we've actually done is we've put some questions in to help you think about it. So if I just turn this on, hopefully you can all see this, and I'm just going to show you what happens for a few minutes. Now this is a YouTube video, and it's been designed to show you two things. First of all, how not to undertake an interview, and then secondly, how it could be improved. It's in English, but it has got some subtitles as well. And what we've done is we've put in a few questions to help you to think about it. So if I just press play, you'll see the first question is me speaking and introducing the interview.
Watch the interview that follows carefully, whilst also considering the criteria that constitute a good interview.
Okay, now you can see that what happens at this point, the video pauses and it asks you a question. What do you think about this first question? Does it meet or break any of the rules of VAL's 10 criteria? You need to answer that question. In order to do that, you need to have read VAL's criteria. And we've put those as a link in the materials that you're provided with. So you'll see there's a link, and I'm going to open those now just to show you where those are. This is the link. And you can see that I can't pronounce this name. If anybody can help me, I have a feeling he may be Scandinavian.
Is he?
Steiner. And you can see that he listed 10 criteria for a good interview. And these are the 10 criteria. For example, being knowledgeable and familiar with the topic of the interview makes sense. Asking clear questions. And what we're asking you to do is to review this video that we've given you the link to, and to tick off whether you think the criteria are evident or missing. In other words, is this a good research interview? We'll just go back to it. I'm going to, you can rewatch that.
Press skip.
We're going to skip the task.
Right. And what's driving light for you?
Okay, another question comes up, and it goes on like that. Now, this is designed to get you to interact with the video and to think about this video as a piece of research in terms of a data collection tool, and to spot the faults. It's really full of things that we would hope to avoid as we undertake an interview. And again, I keep coming back to these list of criteria here, the kind of things that we want you to think about when you're actually asking questions or when you're conducting your own interview.
I think probably another thing to say about the interview is not just those qualities of a good interviewer and the checklist that you need to be thinking about, but also being aware of what your position is in the interview and how other people might perceive you, what other people might be thinking of you when it comes to you actually asking the questions. So a parent that you might interview might think of you in a different way than a student might think of you. And because of that, you might get different answers because people might want you to hear different things. So it's always important to be aware of your own position within the interview. And I don't mean your physical position, although that is very important, but your actual position as in who you are and how you're seen by other people.
Yeah, I mean, there is also a very important thing there. We've put down as question 4. If I just go back to that sharing the screen again, we've actually said question 4, how do you conduct a good interview? And that's something that we might want to spend a few minutes thinking about. It sounds easy. And I think one of the difficulties of using interviews for teachers is that in one sense, an interview is something that you probably do quite a lot in your day-to-day work. You might talk to parents. It's a kind of interview. It's a conversation. You might talk to students. It's a kind of interview. But what makes a research interview different? And I think one thing most people would say is that it's rigorous and it's prepared in order to collect data of a particular type. So many conversations are quite open-ended. What we're trying to do in a research interview is to ensure that the data we collect is credible and believable. So there are certain ways in undertaking a research interview that might differ from a normal interview. And one good piece of advice that I've always followed is, if you've not undertaken interviews for this purpose before, try and do a pilot. Try and get somebody who will be prepared to be interviewed, develop your schedule, and then test the schedule with somebody, if you like, who is a tame subject, somebody who's happy to be interviewed. And if possible, real advantage is to video yourself doing this. If you're prepared to be recorded, because you can then watch yourself, you can go back and you can identify how well you undertook that interview, what the strengths might be, but also areas that you might want to develop. And none of us are perfect. Every time I undertake an interview, I can think of things I got wrong and think next time I'll try to remember and do that differently.
There might be some very obvious things that you're just not aware of. You might have a nervous tic, you're constantly playing with a pen or something. Things that you're not really aware that you do that can be off-putting if you're being interviewed by yourself. So it is a good idea if you can get somebody to be a guinea pig, as we would say in England, somebody who will allow you to test them out using your interview. And yes, as Kevin said, I would thoroughly recommend getting somebody to video you or put your mobile device on a tripod and get a video of yourself conducting the interview.
So if I just go back and reinforce what I think would be a good activity to follow up this webinar, the first one we've talked about, I'm going to share my screen again. I think the first thing to do is to check that you're familiar with the criteria for undertaking a good research interview. Have a read of that again. You might want to ask questions, talk to a colleague, identify whether you agree. You may have some additional criteria, but these are generally regarded by most researchers as being good qualities to observe when you're undertaking a research interview. So get yourself familiar with that first of all. You then want to develop your research schedule. I'll just go back to our questions. So you need, yeah, Sarah's saying explain that. So you need to decide what questions are you going to ask? And typically your questions will relate to your research question. And this comes back to why Sarah was emphasizing the importance of the research question at the start. You really can't do any of this until you're clear about your research question. So if your research question is one that points you towards interviews, you should be able to break your research question down into what we call a series of operational questions. And these are the questions you would actually ask your research participants. They might be students, they might be teachers, depends, of course, who it is you're going to be interviewing. But you need to have that schedule in front of you as you undertake the interviews. And as I said previously, you need to check as you're doing this that you're matching these criteria that we've just looked at. Now, one of the resources that we've put together to help you with this and to help you think about how to undertake a research is this video called Semi-Structured In-Depth Interviewing. I'll just put this up on the screen. maybe a bit large. Hoping you can all see that.
Hi, welcome to this video lecture about semi-structured in-depth interviewing. It is a method that is very, very commonly used in action research. You can write a whole book about interviewing, but in this video lecture, I intend to just give you some insights in interviewing. And I also will be giving you an example of an interview that I did with someone from the slum. So let's have a look. So I will be seeing Juliette, and she will play the role of Justine. So the story is not real. It would otherwise get a little too personal. I asked Juliette to not prepare the interview, but to answer as if she is someone from the slum. You are going to see just a part of the whole interview where I will give you some written instructions. Nice place. Thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? Okay. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for letting me ask you some questions.
Okay, now I'll just stop that for a second. We've put that video in because one of the things it does quite well is to break down the different stages of undertaking a semi-structured interview, which is probably the most popular type of interview undertaken by teachers and by educationalists in general. It's not perfect. I did have some questions about why she was undertaking the interview in public like that, and you'll see that that actually causes some problems. But one of the things it is useful for is it phrases the different stages of an interview, and because it's annotated, it gives you ideas about what to be thinking about. For example, here, trying to express appreciation at the start of an interview, trying to make sure that the participant is relaxed and feels comfortable. So that's a useful resource, and hopefully you'll get a chance to look at these after the session. All these resources are going to be available in the classroom, Google Classrooms, and we'll leave those all there. And we've also created spaces for you to comment on these resources. So what I'd like and encourage you to do is to actually engage with these resources and to leave us some feedback after each seminar, or you might want to come back to this at the end of the week and think about which of these approaches you're likely to undertake. Okay, so we've covered there all the resources bar one, which I'd like to draw your attention to. Are there any questions before I go on to the last set of resources? Anybody want to ask anything at this point about the resources that we'd like you to look at, work your way through?
Yeah.
Oh, one question?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to ask a question?
Are there any resources how to break down the questions? I mean, to help you break down the questions down to smaller parts so you don't get only the main question as a focus.
Yeah, I see what you're driving at. So you've got your main research question. How do you break it down into questions that you could actually ask in a research? Yeah. We haven't put anything up, but
no,
we can put one of those in, and we're making a note of it at the moment. So in the book, which is what I was just going to go on to, actually we do cover this in the research book. So what we're hoping is that you've had a chance, or will have a chance, to download this iBook that Sarah and I wrote. I'm going to show you it now, and we've put a link in. You can see there is a link here, and it's a link to a case study. So if I just open the book, let me share the book with you. Just need to change my screen. Okay. So what you should see now is the book. This book's called Researching and Evaluating iPad. Now I know it's about iPads, but you can use it for any topic, and this is available freely. We've put the link on the Google Classroom, but it's available freely from the iTunes bookstore, and it covers all the different topics that you need to undertake in a study. These are the main stages. So we'd strongly recommend you have a look at this. But the one that we're focusing on, if we just jump ahead to this study, this is a study of a classroom. And what we've done is to pull out one of the case studies. I'll find this in a second. Oops. We've pulled out this case study when I find it. Oh, there we are. This is a case study. It's a fictional case study, but it's based in a primary school, and it uses interviews. So we've highlighted this particular case study to illustrate how to undertake an interview. And all the case studies are the same. They all have a background, a pedagogical focus, a research question, and a method of data collection, then data analysis, which we'll do at a later session. So I'd recommend you to have a look at that book, but what we will do, taking on board that feedback you've just given us, is we'll make a posting of an actual research question that's been broken down to show you how to turn the broad question into a series of interview questions that you might ask in a typical interview, research interview. Is that okay? Does that answer your question? Okay. So, I think we've covered all the resources now. So we've looked at the activities that we think are useful. We've identified the 4 questions. I'll come back to sharing my screen. 4 questions that we've identified as being key questions. So you've got, what is an interview and how would you use one? What kind of interview would be best for your research? Is it structured, semi-structured, or unstructured? What tools and apps, that's something we haven't talked about today. We'll just talk about that before we finish. What tools and apps can help you undertake a good interview? And finally, how do you conduct a good interview, which we have talked about. Now, one thing we've posted quite a lot about, and in the book we make a lot more references to this, is how you can use technology to undertake an interview. And I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts about how they might do that. For example, how might you use your iPad, your iPhone, or whatever phone you've got to actually support you in the process of undertaking interviews? Can anybody think of anything there that they might use technology for in this process? Don't forget to unmute your microphone if you want to speak. Anybody got any examples of how they would use the technology they've got to hand, so to speak? Nobody? Okay, you're a very quiet group. One of the things we've suggested in the book, which I've just referred to, is that you think about using some of the apps for recording interviews. And there are different ways in which you can do this. So some apps are simply voice recorders. And I'd strongly recommend that if you're going to undertake interviews, you record the interview. Some people feel that they can make adequate notes and they can write notes down, but in my experience, that's been very difficult. I find it very difficult to make notes during an interview, and so I use a recorder of some sort. I used to use the old tape recorder. With mobile devices, I now use my phone, and there are plenty of apps available on these mobile devices that will allow you to actually record your voice. Some of the apps take it another stage further, and they actually will attempt to translate, or transcribe rather, not translate, transcribe your voice into something that approximates to writing. Now, it depends on how accurate your particular apps are. I don't find at the moment that the apps are accurate enough to actually make a transcription of a recording in full, but some of them will do some of that. And so we'll put a list of the apps that we use in the classroom. These are already available in the book we've talked about. and we demonstrate how those are used. The advantage, as I say, is that you can go back to those, you can listen to them afterwards, you can replay, and in some cases you might decide that it's not just the voice you want to record, but you actually want to use video, because for whatever reason, you want to capture somebody's actual movements. This is possibly more important if it was a video, for example, where you were capturing activity. Somebody was doing something. But sometimes body movements, or body language as we call it, are also an important aspect of the research process, in which case you'd want to capture video as well as sound. My last piece of advice about using any technology really, apart from the obvious things, make sure it's charged, make sure that you've got power. The most important thing I think is make sure you've got a good microphone, because often people set their mobile phone down and then they're surprised they can't hear very well. It records you more likely because you're closer to the phone than your participant. So it's worth thinking about purchasing an external microphone. You can buy Thai mics, which are very, very cheap, a few euros really, and they'll plug into a mobile device like a phone or a tablet device, and you tie those to the person who's speaking or clip them to their clothing, and it makes the sound much, much clearer and easier to understand. So I think thinking about technology use, when we come to analysing data, particularly analysing interviews, we'll talk about some of the technology we've used that actually will help you with this and will help you to break the spoken word down into text and start to analyse the text into patterns. But that's for a later session when we look at analysis. This session's just been focusing really on data collection and focusing exclusively on interviews. So we're coming towards the end of the time we've got allocated. We've got about an hour and we've been speaking now for 55 minutes. I really want to encourage you, if you can, to ask questions. I know some of you may be a little bit reluctant to ask them orally using the microphone. So if we go back to the screen, I can turn this back on again, today's meet, and there are a few more questions now. But if you want to post another question in here, any items in here that you'd like me to answer, questions you want me to answer, or if you're happy enough to turn your microphones off and ask a question that way, that would be great, and we can do that for the last few minutes before we finish today. Okay, any more questions? Anybody want to ask anything? Or post a point in the today's meet. You've got the link there. Any questions at all? Jürgen, have you got anything you want to ask? Your sound's muted, Jürgen. I guess that was a no.
No. So, no, it was a no. Yes, it was.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So, and I'm sitting here with 3 other teachers, and seems satisfied. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the most important thing now then, tomorrow we're going to look at surveys and think about how we construct a survey or a questionnaire if you decide that that's how you want to collect data. On Wednesday, we'll look at observations. And in terms of observation, we're suggesting that you use some technology. You don't have to, but observation technology, there are some apps now that will allow you to capture the observation and annotate the observation live. So we'll be demonstrating that, we hope, on the screen here. But those are the plans for the next 2 webinars. What I'd like to encourage you to do, if you're interested in using interviews, is to go back to the material that we've posted here in the classroom, work your way through that, and then think about asking questions to either myself or to Sarah. So we're available, that's the purpose of this work really. We're available to talk to you either as a group or on a one-to-one basis. And particularly once you've got your interview question fixed, I think we'll be wanting to talk to you individually about the research and try to help you to focus on, first of all, data collection and the process of collecting data, and then the data analysis. So in terms of tasks, if we don't see you again this week, your main task, I think, if you haven't finished already, is to finish your research questions in that spreadsheet that Sarah shared at the start. And the second task is to have a look at these activities, read about these, watch the videos, post questions, post your feedback, and contact us once you're ready to start collecting data. We'll be making a general posting to this effect at the end of these 3 webinars on Wednesday, and we'll send an email out with a summary of all this activity and where we're going and what's next. So I'm going to stop now, unless anybody has a final question. We've got 2 minutes left. I don't think we'll get cut off immediately at the end of that time, but just so that we're aware, time is moving on. Any last questions? Stop sharing my screen so that I appear again. Okay, well, if I can just say thank you very much for attending. The recording of this webinar will be made available. I'll send that to you, Jorgen, and push it also through the classroom. So I'll post it almost immediately. It should be available in the classroom. If you want to go back, have a look at that. Or if there are colleagues who weren't available to attend today, then they can have a look at that as well. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow.